На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. This week we're shortened down to just a two-man crew, as I'm your host James, as always, joined by David.
Hello.
And this week we're going to quickly cover some of the latest action in the RPL games, which was a weekend of potentially quite boring matches, but some upsets in terms of the results. Discuss the sacking of Lokomotiv manager Marko Nikolic, and quickly round up by segueing into the international break ourselves by giving a little roundup of the changes to the squad since it was announced and we last discussed the Karpin squad, because it's been quite chaotic to say the least, but we'll get into that later. First of all, Marko Nikolic has been sacked as the coach of Lokomotiv Moscow. It was rumoured by Max Alanazarov on his Telegram that he was going to resign. And that was earlier on in the week. I think it was on the 3rd of October, so last Sunday when it was first... on Monday it was, on the 4th of October when it was first rumoured. He had a long thread, which I will quickly paraphrase now, but basically he said that over the last few months the team's apparently been training in two separate groups. Nikolic reportedly had no say on who was match fit, would merely receive a list of available players from the club doctor. He had no influence whatsoever on many of the goings-on around the club and grew frustrated at that. The report further suggests that none of Lokomotiv's summer signings were discussed with Nikolic before they were greenlit, and the staff often learned about these signings as news reports and first saw them when they came in for the first training session. Further on that, and you can get all this in a thread on RFN on the Twitter. Furthering on from that, some of the candidates linked with the job have been Spartak head coach Domenico Tedesco, also for other German managers, Robert Klaus, and who worked with Rangnick during his time at Leipzig. Most recently, the Swiss former Borussia Dortmund and Mönchengladbach manager Lucien Favre has also been linked with the job. So it does, according to these rumours, if they are to be believed, that they are looking towards the German route, as you would expect with Rangnick and Zorn in charge at the club. Now, before we go to some analysis of the sacking, which came as a little bit of a surprise, considering his generally successful period, particularly last year in charge, but this season, Loko have now only picked up 2 points in the last 3 games, of which against Khimki, Ural and Rostov. They have 0 wins in the last 5 matches, and just 2 wins in 10 in all competitions. Loko have actually lost a home game in the RPL for the first time since October 2020. They were unbeaten in the previous 12 league games on home soil, and that was, of course, the one at the weekend where Rostov finally won again and beat Loko 2-1. And they are actually, Loko, on top of having a little bit of trouble domestically, are having trouble in Europe, as you would see, having picked up only 1 point in 2 games of Lazio and Marseille. And in a longer term, they are winless in their last 13 games in European competition since the 2-1 win against Bayer Leverkusen. Now, those stats are courtesy of Opta Ivan on Twitter, which I highly recommend anyone to follow who is a keen follower of Russian football. I mean, if you aren't, why you listen to this podcast? But straight into it, David, what do you think about this? Is it the right move? I mean, in my opinion, it's not exactly surprising considering Rangnick and Zorn want total control and Nikolic wasn't their man. But away from surprise, was it right or not?
I think it's hard to say. It's definitely the form that they've had of late was a very good excuse for Zorn and Rangnick to make their move. It was, they've been looking for an out on Nikolic for a while, but they couldn't really justify it because he had the team playing quite well. He came in, shook up the squad massively. Obviously, a big shape up of the squad last season or last summer. it was odd because in the league until this weekend they had 4 wins, 5 draws, I think, but 0 losses. But a lot of those draws had come over the last period of time, like the last couple of months. Europe hasn't started particularly well for them. And I think this was their point where they could get away with pushing for Nikolic to go. I can't remember what the exact wording was, whether he was pushed or whether it was mutual. As per the Alan Nazarov information, that was suggesting that actually Nikolic was walking because he was just too frustrated with all the stops. It's the terrible word, but all the stuff happening behind the scenes,
limitations.
So, all the limitations that were sort of being put in, obviously by Zorn and co, to make life more difficult for him. The doctor having full control over the staff, the playing staff, which actually I tweeted that thread out and I was like, well, actually, that doesn't seem all that bad.
No,
I
it's
suddenly
not that
thought,
surprising.
I suspect that most teams, the doctors have the final say on whether players can play. Maybe we just don't know. Maybe it was literally Nikolic was being surprised at the last minute and said, "Oh, Smolov can't play today," or something, even though he thought he was fit.
Yeah.
Who knows? And obviously the transfer campaign, were apparently players being signed without his knowledge, which again in some clubs not out of the question nowadays with directors of football and stuff. Usually, I would imagine managers are kept somewhat in the loop, but whether he left or was pushed, it seemed like they'd been pushing slightly, and maybe they gave him the final nudge. I don't know. It's a bit of a shame because he's come across well despite playing some largely boring football. Let's be frank. But he got Loko getting results, and that spell in the Champions League last year where they grind out some good performances against Bayern Munich and Atletico Madrid really won a lot of people over who were unsure after the Eurosjomin departure. Nikolic was sort of public enemy number one for a while and won the fans over with the performances that he got from the team last year. And then the new ownership have done a Spartak and sort of come in and pulled out the rug from underneath him a bit. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame to be fair, I think.
Yeah, it's a shame certainly for Nikolic. First of all, I like that you mentioned Spartak because I think it would be remiss for myself to complain about Spartak's directorial potential oversight or maybe over abuse of power or whatever. I mean, it's their own power, but extending that power too far and interfering with matters on the pitch too often. It's a little bit different in this case because in the Spartak case, it is a man who is not a footballing expert exerting power. Here, it's Rangnick and Zorn, who clearly think that they can do better than Nikolic. Their remit is total control over the direction of the club, while his is control over those on the pitch. So it is, at the end of the day, their decision to make. But again, like I said, I can't be so harsh on Spartak and not Lokomotiv because I feel like it's a seemingly unnecessarily disruptive move. Yes, they're out of form, but if you sack a manager every single time a side are out of form, then you're going to be going through the Watford job where it's 18 managers in 10 years or whatever, something crazy like that, where it's just very scattergun approach. So I'm not a high proponent of the constant sacking of managers. I do believe they should be held to criticism without a shadow of a doubt. But I feel Nikolic deserves more time to prove to them because of the impact he had made previously, because everything that he's doing would fit with their philosophy. Perhaps maybe the style of football they think is a little bit too defensive, but he likes to play a high-pressing game. He likes to give youngsters a chance. He's gave many youngsters at Loko a chance, actively bringing down the average age of the squad. So you would be surprised that his style isn't too far away from theirs, especially Rangnick's time at Leipzig. But I think they just wanted their man in. And every time you go through an ownership or any club changes ownership, the position of the head coach becomes one of the more unstable ones at the club because it's so influential, and people in the higher positions want that influential role to somebody that they trust or somebody that they have at least appointed for the accountability. I've questioned Loko all summer, to be honest. That sometimes I believe that they're going on the right track. I think Rangnick was a real get for the club. On the other hand, a little bit confused about Zorn joining him there. Obviously, Rangnick has the overall say on all matters ahead of Zorn, but Zorn didn't do too badly at Spartak, but it's pretty fair to say that he didn't exactly cover himself in glory there. I believe that, and as I mentioned, I remember saying at the time that I think bringing down the average age of the squad was a good thing because that local group was one of the higher average ages in the league. But at the same time, they did overpay for Tiknizian, they did overpay for Konstantin Ardashvili. So there's ifs and buts that you must take, and as often the case, the middle road is potentially the correct one. And whether or not you sack Nikolic, unfortunately, the only way that you can really judge this is the successor. Ironically, that sounds weird to say, but it's who do they appoint? It's always the next step. If it is, say, when Siska firing Goncharenko at the time wasn't surprising. Goncharenko had been through a very poor run of form. He was under fire from Babaya for his results in Europe for a very long time. But then they went and replaced him with Vica Olic, which just never looked inspired. I must admit, I'm a little bit still surprised about Berezutski doing so well, considering he has no experience prior. Is putting square pegs in round pegs in square holes, but it's working. I would never have guessed that Obliakov playing at left back, Chalov playing at centre back, Akhmetov playing attacking midfield, signing Zabolotny playing up front would be nearly successful. They're not lighting the league apart, but far better than anything that they managed under Olic, his successor, so a fair credit to that. So I'll judge it properly when the successor is announced and we see how they get on. But I must admit, I'm a little bit disappointed because I like Nikolic, while also not being surprised in the least. I remember saying at the time in our chat that it was an inevitability. Rangnick loves total control, and it was only a matter of time that he got someone in. I even joked that keep an eye on the German betting markets because it's probably going to be a German coach, and it's not surprising to see that they are linked, a cadre of German coaches. To go to a rumour that of a potential successor that we know a lot about, do you think that Tedesco would work well at Loko? While I can't necessarily see it happening because he did leave Moscow once already for personal reasons.
I think he probably would do quite well there. He also seemed to thrive with a young squad. He was well liked by all. I think we all liked him. We liked his passion that he showed. But I think it's just a token link. Zorn has obviously worked closely with him before. And I think therefore it was just, well, let's just link it and say, I mean, maybe there is, there's no harm in asking the question, and maybe that's what happens. Maybe Zorn went and said, look, do you want to come and manage at Loko? It's then onto Tedesco, and would he I'm not going to use the word betray, but make that decision against Spartak fans who, while Loko aren't their biggest rivals, it's a city rival, which is enough probably to annoy them, and tarnish his decent spell at the club. I think if he wasn't quote unquote homesick, he would still be there at this point, because he was really, really doing something. But I think he would undoubtedly probably do well there, but it seems unlikely, like the most unlikely of the rumours.
Yeah, I'm not saying much in it, to be honest. I think it is just a little bit of clickbait in the press, to be quite fair. I don't think it'll happen, but I've also read, not rumours, but some local fans saying that they would like Rangnick to take over himself. Obviously, he was previously manager, and I can see why they say this. If you look at Loko last year, one of Nikolic's successes was introducing the diamond formation, the 4-4-D, into the side with the Zhemelekdinov as the top of that diamond. Whatever you want to call it, 4-3-1-2, whatever. But it was a diamond formation, essentially. And this season, that's changed. He's basically had a pivot of generally two of Baranov, Kulikov, and Markeyev, playing more of a 4-2-2-2, a 4-3-3 in more recent games. And these two formations, a 4-2-2-2 and a 4-3-3, are actually Rangnick's two preferred formations during his managerial career when he was managing in Germany. So you can see the potential influence of him from behind the scenes there, getting the team to play in a different style. And since changing to that style, it's quite clear that they haven't been anywhere near as effective. I'd recommend people to find the article on counterpress.ru, which goes heavy in depth regarding a tactical analysis of Loko last season and comparing it to their player this season. And one of their key takes, I'll not go through the full thing, obviously, because I highly recommend give them clicks, give them the visit, because it's a great read. But one of their general agreements of why Loko are suffering a little bit this season compared to how good they were in the spring is Zhemelekdinov's positioning, and that Rifat is basically far better as a 10 rather than out on the wing, because he has that space to allow his low centre of gravity and his keen ability to find positions in between the two defensive lines to be at its most effective. While you would see Smolov or Kamano, mostly last season, drift and pull the defences away, go beyond the shoulder. Kamano in particular would like to go out wide before then arriving late into the box. And just the fluidity of that worked really well. And one of the other parts was the effect of fullbacks. Obviously, when you're playing a diamond formation, your fullbacks are vitally important because of the narrow width of the general first top third of the pitch. And they didn't criticise, but did discuss how Rubchinsky and Zhivoglidov are better in that role, but Tikhnisian not so much, and Tikhnisian's a little bit isolated playing in that position. But David, what do you think? Do you think that Tikhnisian was a good signing? I mean, I know you don't rate him the highest of these crop of Russian youngsters at the moment, but how do you think he's been getting on at Loko?
I think Tikhnisian. I think the crucial thing is that Loko played four at the back, and Tikhnisian, through most of his youth, played as a left midfielder or a wing back. And I think that's his best position. He's too attack minded to be a full on left back. He'll just get a bit like Ayrton. Like Ayrton at Spartak really is better suited to the wing back role because he's really good going forward and he's capable in defence. He's not amazing, but when you combine, for a wing back, you need someone who can do both, and the fact that he can do both is fine. Tikhnisian, if you're playing as a stand-up fullback, you need to be arguably, better defending than attacking. But yeah, I think therefore that's the issue. And I remember Krasnodar. Remember when they signed Skopintsev, and he didn't succeed there for the same reason, because Skopintsev had been used to playing as a winger or as a wing back in a five-man defence. Krasnodar played four at the back. It didn't suit him at all. He wasn't good enough to be a flat-out winger for Krasnodar, and therefore they parted ways. And now he's at Dynamo, where he also isn't playing overly regularly as a left back. If he comes off the bench, which he's been doing a lot, he often comes on and plays higher up the field. I wouldn't see starting all the time there. So yeah, I mean, I think they definitely overpaid for him. I don't think his potential is that high. Nizhny. He cost Loko in the Champions League in the first game against Marseille with a stupid foul, which got him sent off and gave a penalty to Marseille. So yeah, that the Maradishvili signing, fine with me because I rate him. There are people who don't rate him, but I rate him. But Nizhny, not so much. He doesn't even have a great amount of senior experience for CSKA. He was limited last year to, I think he got 2 starts, and the rest of his 20-odd appearances were all just cameos off the bench. So it's a player who really in the Premier League has only started probably about a dozen games, if that, probably even less than that. So yeah, considering the fee they paid, I thought it was way too much.
Yeah, definitely. It's like you've said before. It's a case of paying for the passport rather than necessarily paying for the player. I think that's the case with Maradashvili as well. Although I don't rate him quite as highly as you do. I do think he's still one of the better young Russian centre midfielders out there. And I must admit that this article isn't it doesn't just blast Loko. Obviously, it's very well balanced. In that they suggest that Alexis Bekar should play as a number 10. In the Dynamo game, they explicitly mention and highlight how when Nikolic changed it from the 4-4-2 to a 4-2-3-1 and pushed Bekar forwards, and he really pressurised Nicola Moro and played far better than we have seen him playing in a deeper role. And they basically come to the conclusion that Nikolic's clever work has actually minimised a lot of Loko's defeats this season because he's working with a squad that isn't necessarily suited in one that he didn't necessarily buy, that we all realise that now. So they give him credit for working harder under difficult circumstances. So the jury's still out on whether or not this is the correct decision, but it's certainly a big decision for them to make early on. And I think Rangnick probably has a plan. Somebody who's so experienced in football, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a long-term plan to move Loko forward. So regardless of who they do sign next, I think the next 6 months to a year is going to be very interesting over at Loko and to see how the club develops. And as I did mention, Loko lost at the weekend in a 2-1 defeat to Rostov. We'll move on now to the RPL games, and that game in particular. David, how do you think Rostov played at the weekend? And Loko, of course, were without Galore, and they had a 17-year-old in goal. How did he play?
Yeah, that's right. Guillaume may have been sent off against Kimki, and Kudyukov came in that game. They had 2, as is the standard almost nowadays. They had 2 keepers on the bench, Savin and Kudyukov. Kudyukov being the younger of the 2, so I was surprised when he came on. And he was terrific. He earned them that clean sheet against Kimki. They held on for a 0-0 draw. They got bad, and he put in some good saves. And then he got the whole 90 against Rostov this week. It was another decent performance. He made a lot of good saves again. The thing that went against him was just the slight lack of experience. The first Rostov goal, they did what's become quite a common set-piece routine nowadays, I think, is where a team will pile everyone in on the front post or on the goal line to crowd a goalkeeper out. The ball didn't even go. The ball was actually deep, as I recall. It was either deep or flicked on. I think it was maybe flicked on. Goalie was being bullied by Komachenko a bit, but the player on the line had it, cleared it away, but it hit Girano Kirk and went in for an own goal. So the goalkeeper not really too at fault for that. And actually, what I did notice was on the very next corner that Rostov had, he came out and punched. So I thought that was really good when I saw him do that. I was very pleased to see that he knew that he'd been bullied and he took the initiative. He is quite small still, but he did good. He made 6 saves, 75% save percentage. So yeah, I thought he was good, but they did lose. Obviously, Rostov. Um, they started again. They actually started Loko this game. Sorry, I said Rostov lost. Loko lost. Um, Loko started this game without Smolov or Zhemelodinov. They had Kirk, Kamano, and Anjorin as their front three, which wasn't doing a great deal for them. They did score an early goal from Ardashvili from a cross. But after the equaliser, it was a fairly equal game, fairly even. And actually, I was thinking during the game that Rostov. So Rostov obviously signed their two Swedish players, Pontus Almqvist and Armin Gigovic. Must be coming up to a year ago. And Almqvist, I think this season we've been seeing better from him. Like when he signed, I was like, what's the offer for the team? But I've been noticing that he's really sort of upped his game this season, and was really good, and has been really good. Gigovic has been struggling to get regular starts, but started and played the whole 90. And I thought it was definitely his best game in a Rostov shirt. And I remember thinking that during the game, and then he assisted the winning goal in the 88th minute with a lovely sort of disguised through ball to Dmitry Polos, who scored fairly simply when he was through on goal against Khudyakov. But I mean, Loko just not creating the chances that they should have been creating. Rostov had 15 shots. Lokomotiv only had 9. Loko had more possession, but going forward, they were struggling. Smolov and Zhemelodinov both came on during the game, but didn't really do too much for them. Smolov hasn't scored since Russia played Malta in the last international break. Zhemelodinov also has been without a goal contribution in quite some time. And obviously both those guys started the season in fantastic form. They're both in everyone's fantasy teams, and basically ever since we brought them into the teams, they've done nothing. So a deserved win, I think, ultimately for Rostov. They weren't bad, they weren't good, but they were still better than Loko, and they did well to get the win.
Yeah, very good win for them, and that is their first away win, I think, in 6 games now. So they've finally arrested a terrible run of form that they're on. But
I mean, obviously, Siomin was sacked or left whenever it was, and they've got this guy Tadeev in as a temporary head coach, and he's the head coach of the youth team, and he obviously got them going, and they got a nice win.
Yeah, so move on to the next game of the weekend, and it was another upset. We'll start with the start of the weekend, actually. And David, your Rubin side lost against Nizhny. Quickly on just a quick summary of that one. How did Nizhny do?
Well, they've sort of did as they had done. They've been every week you think, oh, they're going to lose, but then they come out and somehow pull together a decent performance. Rubin worked particularly good in the first half, but we came out early and we won a penalty and had it saved. And that's twice this season that we've had a missed penalty go and cost us not a big result, but cost us a result. Krylia earned the penalty, and he then took and he just sort of smashed it hard and low down the middle. And I think Enigmatula saved it almost Akinfeev style with his legs. But the thing that sort of caught people was that Slutsky had shouted from the touchline to let Anders Dreyer take it, but Krylia wanted and ended up taking it because he'd won it and he wanted it. So I'm sure he got a bit of a telling off for that. And it's not the first time I've seen him sort of be a bit rebellious. There was one time last season where I thought he was being a bit anti-manager, but he's not been on the best form. But obviously, he's still not fully fit after his injury. He's with the Georgia team this international break, and hopefully that will spur him on. He actually didn't even start the game; he came on midway through the first half. when Rubin suffered yet another injury. And Mikhail Kostyakov has now played this season up front in centre mid on the right wing where he started the game at right back, and he ended the game playing at left back against Nizhny Novgorod. So he's played in all those positions this season. And then it was actually him who gave away the penalty, but I don't know if you've seen the foul, quote-unquote foul that they gave for the Nizhny Novgorod penalty. For me, it was a definite non-foul. I didn't think it was a foul in the slightest. So I thought we'd been very hard done by the refs on that one. Like, they went to VAR and VAR gave it, and I just couldn't believe it, to be honest. But this is how it goes. Not the worst VAR decision to happen this weekend. And yeah, struggling. We need some results. Despot and Krylia, both actually neither of them started that game, as I recall. Both coming back from their injuries. Neither of them have hit the form this season that we need them to be in. I think we're also now winless into the last 5. So we need something. I remember a couple of weeks ago you asked me, and I said, "Oh, it's just a blip. We've had injuries, we have tough opponents, but then we've had the first game against a quote-unquote easy opponent, which we lost." So another international break, regroup, hopefully get some players back from injury. We're missing 3 left backs, which is not ideal. So hopefully they can be fit again for the restart.
Yeah, hopefully. The injury troubles at Rubin are quite rough right now, but it would be remiss to say that they are also in pretty desperate form. Yet with Rubin, because they're a little bit of a more normal club, there's absolutely zero pressure on Sutsky's position because everyone understands that a blip is a blip. I wasn't impressed with Ilya Bakovsky again, who's on loan from Loko at Nizhny, the young winger. I thought he hasn't had the best of seasons, to be quite honest. Up until he scored against Dynamo Bornal, he spent a lot of the time either on the bench or just kind of the game passing him by. Nizhny's style doesn't necessarily help him because, well, in one aspect it does, because he's a good player. He's a player who can perform best when he's given an opponent to run at and space to run at. But at the same time, a lot of the players bypassed away from him. They play very centrally. Stack the midfield, and
that's where he should be playing as well. I remember when he joined Torpedo, he was playing and succeeding really well in the number 10 role, and I noticed he did play on the right against Samoshnikov. Once then Samoshnikov went on injured, he had a lot of success. But yeah, he's not been starting a lot, but I'm with you. I'm hoping he can start starting more. Maybe initially get someone that maybe get him to play in that central role. He's one who's also eligible for the under-21s, and I thought he might have been in with a call-up shout as an attacking midfield option, but I think he just needs a bit more stability domestically. But I agree with you.
If you look at Nizhny's squad as well, I was about to go on how I just don't like him out wide. If you look at the midfielders, I mean, Sharapov, Sapeta, Mogilevets, Bumal, Kalinsky. I mean, all of them apart from Kalinsky are particularly defensive. Kalinsky's more box to box, but I mean, yes, his experience of performing like this and Bakovsky performing well as a 10 is in the league below, but he is the outstanding candidate to potentially link attack and midfield better, and that's been one of Nizhny's biggest issues so far this season, is the inability to link midfield and attack, and whoever it be, if it's Beckham Balai up top, Suleimanov or Richie Yenin, who started most of their games, a combination of the three, they're just totally isolated because the team sits so deep. So yes, they got the win, but it was a little bit of a contentious decision, and based upon the back of Artur Nigmatulin being absolutely brilliant in goal. So
the player of theirs I've been impressed with. He hasn't started a lot this season, but it's Gorbanov, who scored their first goal of the season. Whenever he comes off the bench, he does tend to play in that sort of pocket, sort of the attacking midfield link rather than out wide. And he always looks quite good. 27 years old, and has been with Nizhny for a little while, but he always seems to do well and doesn't start too often. but he's been one of their players who's really helped them along this season. The strikers, I mean, Valery hasn't scored as far as I recall. Suleimanov has a couple of goals. I mean, most of their goals this season have come from, I want to say, defenders. Kozlov has got like 4, I think, which is just ridiculous. So it seems unsustainable for them. I'd be interested to do some sort of checks on their expected goals and how many goals to shots they're having. But they're getting it done, and if they can just keep it up for a little bit longer, surely they'll accumulate the points to survive, because they're firmly in the mid-table at this point. I think they're in. Oh, that's it. They're like firmly in that group of about 8 teams who still are with a shout of a top 4 finish.
Yeah, I remember Gorbunov like more so 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer now, when he was playing for Dynamo St. Petersburg in the PFL, and then was at Nizhny actually, and was one of the players who got Sochi promoted to the RPL for the first time. And he was like a really highly rated young winger, but he kind of went off the grid since then, just dotted about, and not really made the impact that he did initially make. He was really good for Sochi that year, linked up really nicely with Maxim Borsov. And he was only, 23 at the time too. So it's good to see Gorbunov playing well, but I just wish, nothing against him, I just want to see Bukovsky released in that role. To move from one side where we focus on young players quite a lot to another, Krylia beat Dynamo 1-0 away from home in another upset. Quickly on Krylia, their young star signed from Chitanova, Sergei Penyaev, has been named in the Guardian Next Generation list. Of course, the yearly annual release from the Guardian highlighting the next generation of young stars. Of course, last year, Darsin Zaharian was featured on that, and then not long later was given his big break. Penyaev, picked by Artur Petrosyan, is the obvious example to anyone who listens, who knows anything, a modicum of any information about Russian football. But Krylia, won again. They beat Dynamo with a really nice goal from Roman Yezhov, counter-attack, which Ivan Sergeyev just absolutely tore Dynamo's defence apart with a really nicely weighted through ball. But just quickly on this one, David, what do you think about Krylia this year? And Penyaev, he started played in all but one game for them.
Yeah, I think he missed the first game, but has come off the bench in all of them since. Obviously started in the cup and scored a couple of goals there. I remember at the start of the season when Krylia's first couple of games, I just thought, man, because we were all very excited about this team coming up. Quite a young team. They'd done so ridiculously well in the FNL. Sergeyev scored 40 goals. And, they played really free football. And at the start of the season, I think they lost their first couple. And we were just like, my heart sank because I just thought, man, are they really not going to be able to adapt? But they've started to come through a little bit of late. They've got 4 wins now, 13 points after 10 fixtures, and they're not prolific, but the goals are coming. Sergeyev's got a few goals now. They're putting in good performances. Zinkovsky's been recognised by our national team. And it seems like they might be okay now this season, which is always nice to see. And yeah, they put in a defensive masterclass. Not well, masterclass maybe a bit too strong, but they were really good defensively against Dynamo. They kept them out, kept them from creating too many chances, and they scored off a counter attack, which they needed to do. I think the addition of Sylvie Begic from Rubin on loan has actually been a big help. Soldatenkov, who I was really, he was their captain and had been really good as when they got promoted, but made a couple of slight mistakes. And I think Begic has come in sort of stolen that position in the team and has done particularly well for them. Glushenkov, I just love watching Glushenkov play. Prutsev's doing really well at the moment as well. Zinkovsky, we know. Yerzhov, I think that must have been Yerzhov's first goal of the season. Didn't do a lot with goals last season when they got promoted either, or assists, but started a lot, which tells you something. It shows that he's putting in the effort and the work rate for the manager to keep playing him like he does. It's just nice, It's a real team effort. No one's scoring lots of goals, but the goals are coming from all over the pitch. Saveli, Glushenkov, Sergeyev, Yerzhov have all scored now this season. So it's nice to see, and it is still a fairly young core there. You've still got in that game against Dynamo, we had Loaev, Gorshkov, Zinkovsky, Prutsev, Yerzhov, and Glushenkov. So that's 6 players there from the Chertanova era who started, and then Yakuba, Pinyaev, Saveli, and Sipchenko came off the bench. There's another 4, so 10 players played against Dynamo who have come from Chertanova. I think they've stopped my heart from sinking a little bit of late.
Yeah, I remember being a little bit worried at the start of the season, but it's good to see them getting a nice string of results together. And I agree. I really like watching Glushenkov play. I think he's a really just classy player on the ball. It's a real shame how it's worked out so far at Spartak, with him just picking up the injury and then not really getting a good chance. And then those early on, he did get that little run in the team, and he played well, but just couldn't put really, really like gilt-edged chances away. And after that, you just kind of knew with how ruthless those are in charge of Spartak that he wouldn't be getting that chance that season. A little bit like Uranov when he first started, and people judged him before he was really able to show his quality there, and then was shipped out on loan. But he is, of course, only on loan at Krylia. So from my perspective, I hope that he can get the ground running this season, as he has, playing well so far, and return to Spartak, hopefully with a little bit of renewed vigour. The next game was probably the best game of the weekend, despite being goalless, and that was CSKA Krasnodar. David, you're going to have to unpack this one because it's a little bit of a crazy game. 49 shots on goal.
Oh yeah, it was outrageous. It's a big say. I mean, Safonov was particularly good for Krasnodar in goal. Just an end-to-end affair. I think Krasnodar, as I recall, were the team with the dominant number of shots. I will just quickly pull that up here and confirm. But it was they were the team with the most shots. I think you'd said you'd read some stats so that we couldn't find whether it was true that it was a game with the most amount of shots and potentially even the most amount of passes in RPL recorded history. A crazy game. Krasnodar had some really good chances to win it towards the end. The team they put out, it's just nice to see them playing fairly well again. Obviously, the defense is still the weak spot, as it were. But last week, Sorokin and Kayo in the Sochi game, where they won 3-0 and ended up with 9 men, those two were really good. And I think they carried it over, were fairly good this game, despite the number of shots they let go on goal. So some ridiculous shot stats. Good save, a lot of saves from both goalkeepers. Savonov obviously picked up man of the match after a couple of really, really big saves. Vilhena playing at left back. You sort of know my distaste for the man, and not for the man, but for the player. I'm sure he's a very nice man, but wasted some gilt-edged counter-attack chances towards the end. He was playing left back, and he was coming to the box on that channel just inside the box where you can picture a left back coming in, receiving the ball there and just shooting straight away when the shot was nowhere on. I haven't checked, but I suspect the XG on those 2 shots were... Actually, no, I did check. He had 4 shots in total with less than 0.1 XG combined or something. Ridiculous. Just wasted 2 amazing chances. And then the game culminated. Krasnodar really put the pressure on at the end. And they had 2 penalty shouts. The second one was a gilt-edged handball not intentional from Diveyev, but it hit his hand and it stopped Klaassen from bypassing him very obviously. And for whatever reason, the VAR did not check it. VAR didn't even have a look. There was no check, as far as I'm aware. And then, well, I don't know if you wanted to go over the news or whether I just carry on.
Yeah, man.
Today's news. I think it was Vasily Kazartsev, who you informed me was the referee who erroneously awarded a penalty for Sochi against Spartak on the opening game of last season, and subsequently received a few months suspension. He was the man in charge of VAR, and he has today been suspended for at least a year, if we believe what Sport Express say. He's received a lifetime ban from refereeing for not informing the referees of the handball. Because it was blatant. If you go onto the RFN Twitter, there's a tweet on there, retweet with a picture of the handball, which, granted, in context, actually, I looked at it earlier, thought, well, this is a bad picture because it actually looks like Klaassen's handballing it at the same time. But it was absolute blatant handball, and Krasnodar would have therefore had a 92nd minute penalty and a chance to win the game. But it didn't. Ended 0-0. As 0-0 goes, a very good one, and obviously then had its fair share of drama as well.
Yeah, it was. It's pretty stonewall. It's one of the most obvious apparently decisions I've seen in quite some time. Like you said, rumours of a ban for life. I think it's not necessarily this decision in isolation. I think it's a series of gaffes from Kazartsev, which are pretty either very highly publicised or very important ones. Obviously, the biggest one that I remember was, like I said, the Sochi game for Spartak last year with the late penalty for Christian Aboa to win the game. And in that, the VAR outlash was against Kazartsev, who essentially failed a polygraph test on whether or not he gave the decision honestly. For that, he was suspended for a couple of months. So it seems like it's more so an accumulation of just high-profile errors and gaffes and causing a lack of accountability in his own personal ability to referee games. But aside from that, it was a fascinating match. It was really entertaining to watch. Unfortunately, like I say, we couldn't get the goal, but that was a little bit of a pattern throughout the entirety of the weekend, with only 10 goals during the entirety of the games, 4 1-0s and 2 0-0s. So after getting the first 0-0 of the season only in week 9, was it, between Himki and Loko, we then got quite a few more boring games, defensive games that it would typify of past years in the RPL. But we'll move on to the last game that we're going to discuss in depth, and that is, of course, the last big upset of the weekend, and that is Zenit lost at home to Sochi. That is Sochi's first ever win over Zenit in the history of the club. Granted, that's not very long, but congrats to them. In that game, Sardar Azmoun was sent off after a VAR decision was overruled and decided that the yellow card that he originally received should be a red card. That was, my opinion, a pretty poor decision, but I'll move on to that later. Artem Zuba gave them the lead just before half-time, and then in the second half, Matteo Cassiera scored to level it up. Just 4 minutes later, Sergei Terekov got the winner. Now, they're two players in a rich vein of form this season. Matteo Cassiera, of course, we have briefly mentioned on the pod. He's the Colombian striker who was signed from Belenenses. He's got now 2 in 4 games. Sochi have only lost once, I think. Twice, sorry. They lost twice since he arrived, and one of which was a 3-0 heavy defeat to Krasnodar. But Cassiera was probably one of Sochi's better players that game. He had a really effective game, and then obviously against Zenit and Ufa, I was really impressed by him. I thought he performed very well. David, is there any standouts here from the Sochi perspective?
I mean, I agree with you on the Asmoon red card. I read earlier that he won't receive a further suspension. I honestly thought they were going to withdraw the red card, but it seems like maybe not, because it was, it was just a striker going for the ball, and he just, happened to get. I didn't think there was anything dangerous. Okay, that's maybe a lie, because he ended up kicking him in the midriff, but like they're on the ground. This is not like a karate kick. They're both challenging for a low ball. I don't know. I thought it was very harsh. Yellow, even a yellow, I thought was harsh. I thought it was just a genuine attempt to play the ball. There was no malice. I didn't think it was overly dangerous, but whatever. The first Zenit goal was another. I say another, but a defensive error. Big cross went into the box. Chistikov and Krylia both went for it. Chistikov essentially made Krylia drop it, almost headed it out of his hands, and Cassio then just had an empty net to tap it into. So that wasn't ideal, considering we've been somewhat praising Zenit's defence of late. But if we talk about the two key errors that have happened in recent weeks for them, both involve Chistikov now and Krylia, because that Lukaku goal, I still think Krylia should have saved, personally. And then, it was a good winner. The Yusupov's assist, he absolutely sat down Barrios. Got played in down the right channel, right to the byline, faked across on his right foot. Barrios bought it, jumped in, basically Sol Campbelled off the pitch, and then Yusupov just had an easy pass into Terekov.
Did you just use Sol Campbell as a verb?
Yeah, I did, yeah. But interesting that game we had probably the left back and right back who will start for Russia this week. Terekov for Sochi will probably almost certainly, it seems like, will start at left back for Russia, and it would seem that Sutomin may well start at right back for Russia. Two uncapped players who have both been in good form. Terekov, as you say. And actually, what prompted me to remember this was that I just saw a picture on the FNAL Twitter of them both holding the FNAL trophy, because they were both promoted with FC Orenburg 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So, they've come a long way together, those two guys. Sutomin's career path is slightly different, left Zenit at a young age, went round the houses, ended up back at Zenit. Terekov started at a very modest Dynamo Bryansk, worked his way up through the rankings, happens to be with Sochi at a good time for both him and the club, and that's enough to have earned in this call up late in his career, because he's 29, 30, 31, I forget, somewhere in that vicinity. But yeah, very good result for Sochi. Of all the teams who had the qualifying for Europe, they were so close to getting there. That they almost had that result against Partizan. They would have then had to go and play Santa Clara, as I recall it was. But they were literally like 2 minutes away from being Partizan, and I feel they could have easily made the group stages. They just had one or two lapses in that game, which cost them, which is a shame, because they've kept their form up this season. Rubin, compared to last season, not as good. Defensively, they've conceded more, and the form's not been as good. But Sochi, and in general, I think, have been as good as last season, and they're not relying so heavily on Noboa. Noboa's scored once or twice this season, if that. I actually don't know if he's even scored at all that I can recall. The goals are coming from a lot of different areas. They're actually getting, obviously they lost Zabolotny, but the goals are coming from elsewhere. So I think fairly promising signs from Sochi this season.
Yeah, definitely. That lack of having to rely on Noboa is a massive move for Sochi. He's scored twice in the RPL this season, Noboa. But by this point last year, I think he got 6 or 7. So he
scored a lot. Yeah, I'm going to try and dig out the assists, because I don't know how many assists he's got either. Even
Yeah, and this isn't anything against Noboa either. He's still very effective on the games. It's just like you say, they're finding other avenues of being able to work the ball, and they're playing like I think I mentioned it earlier towards the start of the season, how they seemed to have the early on shoots of playing a different style. They're far obviously they do defend very well still, but if you look at their team, Rodrigo and Prokin are very effective ball players out from the back. And then the rest of the side are just good. Most 90% of them are good technically proficient players. They are far less sit deep in a low block than break as fast as they can, using Zabolotny's admittedly very good target man ability to get other players into the game, particularly Noboa. It's a total change in style, and Vladimir Fedotov's just continuing his absolutely brilliant work with them. I've been impressed by Terekov as well this season. He, like you say, he's spent nigh on the last 10 years just dotting about the FNL. Granted, one of the better players in the FNL, but he played for Dynamo Moscow a little bit in the RPL after they were promoted again towards the end of his time at second spell at Dynamo. But like I say, before then, the first year Dynamo in the second spell was in the FNL. Most of his time in Orenburg was at Volga, Baltika, Himki. Like he's been generally just an average little bit of a journeyman defender. So him using his experience to play the way that he is in what is a more unfamiliar role of late, pushing forward to a wing back is good to see. And he totally, without a shadow of a doubt, deserves this call up. He's been by far one of the best Russian fullbacks in the league this season, albeit surprisingly. So and I agree. I think Sochi probably would have made the group stages against Santa Clara. It's just a shame that, like you said, they had those couple of errors against Partizan, lapses in concentration more than anything that you see from players who are not used to playing at a European level, and unfortunately getting drawn against one of the harder sides in that stage of the seedings. So we'll move on from Sochi now and address the last topic, which will just be a quick one. Looking over the Russia squad, of course, since we last spoke, Valery Karpin did trim down his squad, and due to various injuries, fatigue and lack of fitness, there's been quite a big shift in the personnel in general. So those who were dropped from the squad were Krysyuk, Mukin, Zinkovsky and Tukavin. The following players, a long list, have pulled out of the squad due to differing forms of injury. Nadziuba, as we mentioned before, as well as Golovin, Makeyev, Kryshikov, Samoshnikov, Zoblin, Karavayev, Vinyonov. They've been replaced by Rostov's 21-year-old midfielder Danilo Glebov, Akhmetov at CSKA, Arsen Adamov, and Denis Makarov. Arsen Adamov might be a little bit of a name that many don't recognise, but he's been playing very well in Ural this season, a young fullback. And Mikhail Ignatov and Kirill Bozhinov, the Spartak and Himki youngsters respectively, well, on loan at Himki, have also trained with the first team due to the lack of numbers, and because the under-21s, the side that they named in, are training in the same place as the seniors, all playing in Kazan. So after all of that, quite a big mix around in the squad, they will be playing Slovakia in Kazan and then travelling to Slovenia for the next two games of the World Cup qualifiers. So, David's initial analysis on this, we mentioned it off air previously, but I will mention it again now. The one that sticks out to me in that list is a little bit of an odd move, is that Maxim Mukin was, of course, initially named in the squad, was then dropped out when he trimmed it down from 34 to 27, and then joined up with the under-21s, as we have discussed, is to make his debut for under-21s and so on. But then when other midfielders dropped out through to injury, he wasn't called up, but Ignatov was asked to train from the under-21s, not called up the squad, but asked to train. And then later on, Akhmetov and Glebov were then called up, who weren't anywhere near. So it's that seems like a little bit scattergun, in my opinion, which is a pattern with developing so far in Karpin's tenureship in Russia.
I think that's one way to read it. I think he's maybe showing that he's open to rewarding players who are playing well. If we talk about Ignatov, for example, he obviously is in the under-21 squad. Presumably him and Bozhnov just both called up to make up numbers while replacements flew in. But if we talk about it, he in the last week scored a crucial goal for Spartak against Napoli in the Europa League. So maybe just being rewarded for that. As for Mukin and Glebov's situation, that is odd. When you said it earlier, I was like, yeah. His explanation is that Glebov knows the position, knows the demands more. Although wasn't asked about Mukin directly, he was just asked why was Glebov called up, and he said, well, he knows exactly what I want from him in this position, and obviously they worked together at Rostov. It was Karpin, I believe, who signed Glebov for Rostov from Angie. So they know each other, and I think this is again another note that he's rewarding players who are in good form. Rostov have been very poor this season, but Glebov has been very good. I remember someone asked me about him on Twitter, and I actually wasn't overly complimentary. I said, look, I think he's a decent player, but I wasn't sure, where his potential is. He's not an attacking midfielder. He's not like, I don't think he is a bit similar to Glushkov. I think he's more of a defensive. He's like a more aggressive version of Kante. He really will get stuck in. He doesn't score a lot. He very rarely scores. Doesn't get forward a great deal. He's just that guy who does a lot of running. He's the Rostov captain, so we know sort of therefore what sort of player he is to be given that responsibility at a young age. He's only 21. So yeah, it shows that I think he's willing to give players the chance if they're playing well. Akhmetov is another player who I think we've talked about on the pod recently, that he's on. I think he's having a very good season. Been played in a slightly higher role where he started his career, and therefore, when Golovin dropped out, Akhmetov can. I think that is a similar comparison in terms of the positions and the playing styles. Both the guys who can carry the ball well. The initial squad being 34 and so big, you may as well just call up everyone in Russia who is eligible for the Russian national team at this point, because you probably get to, 50 players. I don't know, that's just a ballpark, who are potentially, if everyone's fit, there's probably about 50 players who are legitimately in contention for the Russia squad, I would imagine. If we talk about, he's named 34 plus 7 goalkeepers in total, plus players who are out injured, plus players on the fringes who are coming through. He was asked about Glebov, and Karpin said, well, who else would I was going to call up? Umyarov. He hasn't trained for 2 days, and he's with the under-21s. I mean, that to me shows that he's actually considered Umyarov, because why would he just say it unprompted? And again, Umyarov, we discussed last week, on excellent form for Spartak, but has played a lot of football in recent times. And I think he thinks that therefore he and Mukin probably just need that spell. Mukin, as we discussed last week, has bypassed the under-21s entirely. But he's still only 19, so he's going to be eligible for this group of players, for this squad, for a long time to come, for another couple of years. So I think he let him drop in and just decided that I'm going to just give him this international break in the under-21s, him and Tukavin, because even Tukavin is quite uncapped at that level, and he has a couple. So that's just my view on things, but I'm well open to if it is the scattergun, I'm quite open to the scattergun. That's how I would take international management personally, is reward players who are in form. You have to have a balance. You call up players who are good, even if they're not playing, like Miranchuk.
Yeah.
But you also then bring in some players who are in form, and you need to see if that form sticks and how they perform in training, and etc. etc. So, yeah.
I suppose that is true. We did complain in the past, Cherchesov's sort of cadre of mates.
Would you rather have like Glebov, Akhmetov, etc., or Zhirkov, Yonov, cool in the tank?
What was it that he unprompted said about Glebov's call-ups when he mentioned the website?
Oh yeah, someone just said, "Oh, why did you call up Glebov?" He said, "My reasons are on the RFU website. You should go." What was that? I can't find the quote. I closed the page. It was something along those lines. Go and check there.
It's really weird. I'm not quite sure if he's trying to be funny and witty.
I presume because he was just asked the same question in 2 days and he just got fed up with it.
Yeah. I kind of respect that, to be honest. Yeah, there's some interesting names in there, and it's nice to see a little bit of experimentation. I must admit, too much is a little bit worrying, but glad to see Akhmetov called up. I think I agree with you. I think he's been playing really well this season in a different role, as I mentioned earlier. I'm a little bit annoyed not to have seen Zinkowski called up, especially considering that there was a few injuries to wingers and attacking midfielders. Obviously, Golovin dropped out, Yanov dropped out. So it could have been a good chance for him to get his full debut, playing arguably the best form of his career, considering the level that he's playing at right now. He probably played better last year, but the level he's playing at in the RPL, the level above that, and towards the end of last season, he did play well for Krylia, but you have to look at it on a results basis, and I think he's linking up really nicely with Glushenkov, Yezhov, and Sergeyev, forming quite an exciting partnership. So it's a shame that Zinky's not in there, but I think I'm always going to say that whenever he's not in a squad, regardless of who's in charge. So
I mean, we've got Makarov there, so that if we want an unpredictable winger, it's fine. We got one at least. We're all crying out for Makarov to get some football at the Euros, just to give Russia something different, because he was in such good form at that point, and he has started to pick it up for Dynamo over the last couple of games after signing. Zinky is sort of like the footballing equivalent of the Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz. If only he had a brain. He can do so much with the ball, and then at the last minute, he did not do anything correct with the phone, or just whip it in the box. It's like a 5% success rate when it comes to the final decision, but when it comes to getting to the point where he needs to make the final decision, he's unbelievable. He can beat players for fun. If only he could play the right ball more often. But that sort of ball control and dribbling ability would be welcome in the team, I think, still.
Yeah, certainly. It's a position that they lack a huge amount of talent in, especially with Miranchuk out of form and Golovin not in the team through injury. If we do stick to RFU matters, because of course Sbornaya is a part of the RFU, we'll finish up the pod just quickly recapping some news that Sergei Pryadkin this week has resigned as the president of the RPL. Now, it's not quite the RFU, but it's a apparatchik business. Ashot Khachaturian is the acting president. It was previously rumoured that one of a league club executive would be the acting president, just for a little bit of stability in the meantime before Khachaturian is voted in, which is expected to be an unopposed election decided by the 16 clubs. But it seems that it is the case now that Khachaturian is the acting president and will then become the de facto president after that set to be, as things stand, uncontested election. Now, I'm going to stop saying his name. So he's got links in working in oil and the gas industry. Initially working for Gaz Export, which was a subsidiary of Gazprom. Many might not be surprised to hear that. He's also former FSB, state border of the Russian Federation department head, and has also worked at Sberbank and Rosneft. So the usual corporations that you would, and government organisations that you would hear dotting around the power annals of football in the country. The response that I've seen on Twitter to his appointment is that the many are worrying about the increasing Armenianization of the country, which is bollocks, to be quite honest. Let's judge the man on his work and not the fact that he has Armenian heritage. It's absolutely ridiculous. And many Spartak fans, I see as usual, complaining about his Gazprom links. Yes, he did work for Gazprom, but he hasn't worked for Gazprom whatsoever since 1996. That's like a very long time. So we'll see how he does. The president of the RPL isn't necessary. It's an important position, but it's not a massively deciding decision in how the RPL works, because it's not like the RFU. The RPL is more democratic. The future of the league is decided by the clubs and the club owners rather than the president. It's largely more so of a bureaucratic role. So I'm not necessarily agreeing with the furore around the decision, any more so than any single person who's ever put into that role. The general consensus is that they wanted somebody who was more amenable to the club owners. Pryadkin was often seen as a little bit of a stumbling block, arguing quite often, according to reports anyway, with club owners in meetings, and they wanted someone who was basically a little bit more diplomatic. So we'll see how he does, and best of luck to him, because I can only imagine trying to control a room full of 16 club owners and executives is a nigh on impossible task with the egos that must and size of the wallets that must exist in those doors. But best of luck to Kachurians in his position as acting head of the RPL. That's all from us this week. We're going to do a little bit of a longer one than we have of late, but we will be back to cover all of the Russia games that take place during the international break this weekend. As a little bit of a reminder, that is, of course, Russia versus Slovakia at the Kazan Arena, and then they travel to Maribor to play Slovenia away. But this has been the Russian Football News Podcast. Bye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет с ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.